Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Satisfaction Apartment Ratings Power Panels series. Today, we are talking all about employee development, and I'm super excited. We have an incredible panel today who they're going to share all of their knowledge about employee development, learning, and how we're sort of going into the future, because as we know, things are always changing, and that does not leave out any kind of development activities that we have for our associates. But there's all kinds of new things, or at least new takes on some old methods. So our panelists are going to walk us through that today. And I thought we'd start with introducing our panelists. So we have with us today, and it's taken me a second to move my slides. There we are. So today we're going to have them introduce themselves. So if we can, Michelle, if you can go first and kind of tell them who you are.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Wood. I'm the Director of Learning and Employee Engagement with Atlantic Pacific Companies. We operate across the country. We have about 71 properties. We are a owner, manager, third party, and developer. We have about 16,000 units, and about 3,000 of those are affordable housing. So we're kind of operating across the board here.
Yes, I love that variety. That's fun. All right, and Jen, if you can introduce yourself as well.
Sure. Hi. So I'm Jen Calise, and I work for Scully Company. We are a multifamily property management company. We own and operate some of our properties, and we also manage fees for other owners. We have right now 35 properties, soon to be more, with about 7,000 units, about 300 employees. We're based in Pennsylvania, and we have properties in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Connecticut, Florida, and soon to be Massachusetts. So, and we have all different, it's a mix actually. We have high rises in cities, we have garden apartments, but it's all pretty much similar business model. So not any affordable housing.
Interesting. All right, good mix. Wonderful. We cannot wait. So for those of you who have not been to a Power Panels webinar before, what we're going to do, obviously we can't wait to hear from our panelists and share all of their insights, but it'll be about 60 minutes today. I know I had a few folks ask. You will get a follow-up email from us that will include the recording of the session today and also the slides that you'll see on your screen. So no worries, but do take notes, obviously, but you'll also get those slides if you need them. We also would love for you to be interactive too. So if you have questions for either of our panelists today, please use that questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel, and I will either stop them, sort of after they've spoken, or we'll get those questions at the end as well. So if you do have questions, use that questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel. After the session today, as you know, Satisfax is all about feedback. So we would love for you to take our exit survey at the end of the session and let us know if this is something that you like so that we know what to keep providing for you in our industry. So please do rate and comment. We will share one of the comments from the exit survey on social media. And so we would love to hear from you. Just as an update, sort of some housekeeping things, our next webinar, which we'll announce at the end of the session today, will actually be on October 27th this time. So typically it's the third Thursday of the month. I just wanted to make sure everyone knew that we do have that webinar in October on the 27th. All right, so if you're wondering, obviously some of you may have joined because we are giving away that $50 Starbucks gift card. So if you, right after the webinar today, we will have a social media post about the session. So it will be up on our website immediately after the session's over. And all you have to do is like that post and comment with your favorite learning tip. And it can be a learning tip that you learned from our amazing panelists today, or just a tip that you would like to share too. Maybe you're doing something really cool at your organization or your community that you would like to share that works really, really well. So share your favorite learning tip on that social media post, and you can find that on Facebook or Instagram as well. And just let us know what your favorite tip is, and that's how you will be entered to win that $50 Starbucks gift card. The last piece of information before we get moving is don't forget, if you have ever missed one of our Power Panels series, they are available to you 24/7. So satisfax.com, you can access any of our previous Power Panels on satisfax.com. If you are a Satisfax and Apartment Ratings client, you can also access all of this in our education library as well in our Exchange reporting platform. So you have it there or on satisfax.com. So we'd love for you to check out all the fun topics that we've covered in the last couple years. All right, so why are we here, right? We're all here to learn a little bit about the future of employee development. As I mentioned earlier, things are always changing, and as leaders, right, and as organizations or companies in general, we want engaged, right, and high-performing teams. But the good news is your associates are craving that too. So when we look for the top motivators for employees based on our employee surveys, we have found that not only one of the top motivators regards education, but there are actually two that revolve around education. So the number one motivator for employees when they are at your organization or in your community is the opportunity to learn new things. So again, giving us that juice that these are things that your employees are wanting. And especially, with sort of a talent shortage lately, we really have to step up our game on how we're delivering those learning opportunities. So that's number one. And then we all know in order to advance, there's a lot of employee development involved in that as well. So when you think about how do they get those advancement opportunities, that is the training that we either provide from our training and development departments or the training that we're providing on site. So when you're thinking about that, those top things that motivate employers, really focus on this development piece. So I wanted to get a little bit of an idea of what you're thinking. What is going on at your organization or at your community? So if you don't mind, if you can grab your phone and scan this QR code on the screen, we're going to ask a question and do a little poll just to see where everyone is having a challenge as it relates to learning. So if you can just go ahead and scan that, and I'll have it here on the actual poll as well. But we're asking, what is your biggest learning challenge? And this can be at your organization or at your community. Is it a low learning motivation? Is it a low learning engagement? Or are people having trouble with retention, right? What is it that's really, are you really struggling with in your organization? So is it low learning engagement, retention, or are they not really motivated to learn? Okay, we'll give you a couple more seconds if everybody can pick their, okay. I love it. The good news is no one's saying they have all three challenges, right? So this is really good news. Okay. So hopefully you can see on the screen as well. It looks like our audience is saying they're having a combination of two challenges. And so it looks like the top two challenges seem to be low learning engagement and low learning retention. So when we're thinking about these things in our organization, our panelists today are really going to talk about some of these things and how they get people to not only get excited about training, but then how they can help make sure that our teams are retaining that information. So I don't want to take up too much more of the time here. I'm going to go ahead, and Jen is going to start us off today and talk all about the things that they are doing at Scully Companies. So Jen, take it away.
Thank you, Melissa. So I love the fact that we sort of started off with the top 3 employee motivators, and that 2 of them really have everything to do with what we're going to sort of tie up in a little bow today to talk about. And I'm going to also incorporate a little bit of number 3, which is that idea of sort of compensation, bonuses, commissions, incentives. So hopefully we'll address all 3 of those things as we talk today. In talking about the environment that we've got right now out there in the world, in the working world, a lot of what we need to focus on moving forward in learning and development is not necessarily new. So, the idea of a new frontier, the newness is really just an additional focus. It's a little bit of a continuum of an evolving perspective a change in our approach or how flexible we are in terms of our methods, in terms of how we motivate people and engage people, and the idea of coaching, of helping people to sort of develop and grow and help them feel invested in. So before we dive into those particular things and different strategies, I wanted to pause for a moment and sort of address, again, the idea of these top motivators. And one of the things I want you to keep in mind is I want you to do a little like soul searching and think to yourself, how am I doing? Because engaged employees, it's proven, and I'll give you a little bit of information or statistics about it, that they will say what they think, they will stay and grow, and they will strive, they will develop, and they will hopefully become experts. And that's been proven. I'll give you a little of information on that, but I want you to think to yourself the couple of questions, and just to provide some sort of frame of reference for you during the course of this time together. First question, do I allow new employees to be new, or are they expected to sink or swim? Second question, how do I teach existing employees new skills, and does it work? And those two questions really kind of speak to that number one motivator of the opportunity to learn new things. Do I allow people to learn new things, to pause and learn something new? Then the last question, does my existing team trust me as a leader to have their best interests in mind? And that kind of speaks to that second idea of advancement opportunities. So does my team really trust me as a leader that wants the best thing for them, wants to help them grow and develop, and really wants them to be able to progress in the company if that's something that they want to do? So those are really important in terms of engagement. And the big question that Melissa just put up is, how do I know? And I always ask people this in different classes or just kind of in conversation. You can answer these questions for yourself. Yeah, of course. I let my new people be new. And, they're not expected to sink or swim. Or how do you know? How do you know that they feel like you're affording them the time to be new and learn? How do you know, for example, that people trust you, that your team trusts you, and that they are engaged, and that they think that you're a leader that has their best interest in mind? Think about those things, because it's more than just reading the tea leaves. It's pausing, it's asking, it's getting feedback, not just giving feedback. All of those things are really important, because for those of us who are familiar with the Gallup organization, which is really pretty much the most trusted engagement research and poll company in the whole world, they analyzed over 17 million survey responses about key elements found to predict performance. So they reported that engaged employees are involved in, enthusiastic about, and committed to their work and their workplace. And that's what we want. Ultimately, we want people who are committed, not compliant. And so why is this important? Well, let's go to another study by Dale Carnegie. So another survey study that said that companies with engaged employees outperform those without engaged employees by up to 202%. And that's staggering. 202% is a number we don't often hear. So, it's not surprising that it's really important to really foster that feeling of engagement before we even settle in on a strategy for learning and development. And really, as leaders, 70% of our team's engagement is related to how we manage them, how we lead. And that's a really big responsibility. So that question of how do I know, for engagement and for allowing people to be new and allowing them to learn new things and teaching and helping, all those things, that's really important. And 70% of what they do in terms of their engagement is incumbent upon us as leaders. So it's interesting, but to reach our people goals, we have to really ask ourselves these questions and do some, soul searching. And we can work on our strategic goals for training, for building competencies, for results, for maximizing engagement, for cultivating expertise, all that stuff. But we first need to start with us. So let's talk a little bit about our two topics for today. The first one, components of flexible multi-channel training in a just-in-time learning environment. And the second is consistent coaching as a vital lens for employee interactions and growth. So this is just sort of some information, and hopefully it's almost like a poo-poo platter that you can pick and choose from, things that you might want to add into the way that you're already doing things, or just change sort of your focus a little bit. Some of those things that I'm not going to go into too much detail about, but there are a lot of expectations of employees right now in this economic environment, in our overall climate really of employment in general right now, which is so different in this post-pandemic world. I don't even know if I can call it that, because the pandemic isn't really over, but in this different world that we live in right now. So today we'll talk about these kinds of things. Some of them will include bite-sized moments, or we might call it micro-learning. individual development options, different plans for tiered learning, and hopefully you'll get some best practices or ideas for leading or influencing how people learn in your organization. So to set the stage, let's talk for a second about this is really a multi-channel learning pyramid is what I call it. It's actually just the learning pyramid, but I call it a multi-channel because it really does address the idea that people, A, learn in different ways, and B, that people need to learn, most people need to learn by doing or experiencing. There's an experiential part of learning that's really important. And oftentimes, people out there in the field or we ourselves as leaders, we may tell someone how to do something. We may even show it to them once or twice, but oftentimes that's where it ends. And then we just expect them to get it and do it. And so whatever we can do to increase that retention by offering different modalities, different ways for people to be exposed to information can really help to not only get them acclimated to that skill and learn and grow, but also to cultivate expertise over time and hopefully to allow that person in that particular skill to become some sort of mentor or peer expert to be able to teach others. And so although on the right-hand side of this pyramid, you can see that it goes up to 90% for average retention rate, I would argue that I don't know that 90% is an accurate number of what we can retain. I don't know that that's possible, but it is a great aspirational number to try to get to that 90%, which is when a person is able to then teach others in that idea of a mentor or a peer expert. So thinking about all of this and the idea of going through different types of learning, I'm going to go into them in a little bit more detail, I think. But I just want to make sure that we kind of understand that none of these work in a vacuum on their own. All modalities of training are good, they're worthy, but working together to build competencies by offering different stages just in time when they need it is really the best way to get not only retention of information, but engagement. People become committed to that skill and to that learning process. So let's talk about some of these training components in a little bit more detail. So we can go on to there, thank you. So what I've listed here is just sort of some basic information about each of those different components or modalities. So the first one all the way to the left in the blue is on-demand training. And on-demand training, especially in this world where different people are working from different places at different times, it really is a vital part of training. And so that might be, for example, we use right now Paylocity as our LMS program or learning management system. And it enables me to auto-assign basic foundational training, compliance training, things like that, to new hires, to incumbents, based on how long they've been here. And so I can sort of time it to not overwhelm people and to do it when they need it. So for example, fair housing laws training, right? We have them on demand. We have several different courses and different tiers. Those are things that I would assign to new hires right away because they need to know that right away for compliance sake. I also might do that once a year, which I do. Every February have compliance month and I send out specific courses and information that people need to know that's more compliance based in February, and the whole company goes through them again as a refresher. You can also use it for things like systems basics. You can give position specific tools. You can talk about those and send them out, and micro learnings, little bites of things that give people information and that they can go then try, flex that muscle and come back and learn something new. So those basics that you can do through on-demand training are trackable and flexible. And they're really important as a way to give people information and track that they have had exposure to that information throughout their tenure. However, it's not necessarily the only way that you want to train people on information, especially if it's information that they really need to understand, that's nuanced, that may have parts of it that they need to be able to actually try out. So parts that maybe make them uncomfortable, like some of the fair housing stuff can. So the next tier is instructor-led training, or ILT. So instructor-led training is selling and service, for example. Those things do much better when you have conversation, and that can be interactive, like in a room together, or it could be like this, sort of on a webinar, but interactive where we could speak to each other so that people can actually have conversations. We do advanced systems that way. So I might give you the basics of MRI, on demand, but I will give you an actual conversation about how to use those basic components in an instructor-led training. Also position-specific role play. So anytime we want to role play leasing, for example, we want to role play an actual tour. Those things are best done with an instructor leading that in a room together, whether it's in an apartment doing an actual tour or whether it's doing a role play in a classroom. And leadership development. So when you're talking about the development specific skills and competencies of leaders, not informational, but the specific development, that is always best done in person in a workshop, whether it's interactive on Zoom or on a webinar, or in a personal room where you're actually interacting and having discussion. And that's really a deep dive. So instructor-led tends to be more detailed, a deeper dive, an exchange of ideas, and it's responsive. And so that's a whole nother sort of tier of how to build that training plan. So then another example or another method is on-the-job training. On-the-job training is often left unstructured, and I think that's sort of a place where we all fall down. So we have an on-the-job training tool that we've instituted that sort of looks like a game. It looks like a bingo game, but it's actually called a Pride Passport. And I believe I have a picture of it on another slide, so I'll show it to you. But all it is a basic guide for on-the-job training by position, where people, after they attend sort of their basic initial new hire day or two of training and brand orientation, they have a blueprint of working with peer experts and their supervisor internally in their own community and also in another property they can shadow to try stuff. So I call it a try it. It's experiential, it's safe because you're trying stuff, but you're doing it in an environment where there's an expert there to help you along the way. It can be anything from resident interactions to systems application. How do I actually use this and why and when? It allows for observable practice. So not only can I practice in a safe environment, but someone can observe me practicing and give me some feedback about where I might want to spend more time learning. And then I call it graduate as you educate. So you'll graduate from one specific idea or skill as you're trying it and flexing that muscle. And then you'll move on to the next form of education or the next piece of that skill, because it can all be incremental. So you're trying, you're doing, you're getting feedback, and then you're building. And so all of those pieces are then an integral part of not only new hire training, but also learning a new skill. So that's the actual, I'm going to try it. And then we have coaching. So consistent coaching for candid feedback. Also a place where we tend to maybe fall down a little bit. And it's hard. It's hard to be a constant coach, especially if you're a leader or influencer of more than one person. You have to inspect what you expect. You reinforce behavior or skills. You redirect behaviors or skills. And really giving position-specific feedback. So not just feedback that's general, but specific to what this person is doing through observation. And it really does also help you to prepare a bench. The more that you're able to coach and get in there to catch someone doing something right and help them do the next thing right, the more that you're going to be able to cultivate expertise and have a bench for the next opportunity so that you don't have to continue to go outside and hire from the outside. So candid feedback is developmental and incremental. And so that's a big important piece of it. It's incremental. You don't say to someone, I'm going to teach you how the Scully way of doing a leasing tour, and then expect them to go from A to Z after you work with them on it all by themselves perfectly the first time. They're not. So as they do certain things right, you hop in there and you reinforce that behavior, and then you set the expectation for the next piece. Incremental, not waiting for them to do the whole thing right all at once. So those are some important things. I'll add in also when you're using things like Zoom or any kind of webinar, GoToWebinar, whatever it is. It's important if it's an interactive webinar like leadership development or specific deep dive tools that you use the host tools that you've got. So for example, if I'm doing a class via webinar that's a deep dive in communication skills, I'll sit close enough to the camera so that my face can be seen and my expression, and I feel like I'm in the room with people. I'll insist everyone has their cameras on so that I can see them as well. I'll use host muting. I can mute other people if I hear background noise. I can use the polling function. I can use the whiteboard function and the chat. All of those things to be able to help to engage people in that particular interactive session. So those are some of the different components, and they all really work together to go back to that idea of the learning pyramid and trying to employ all different modalities in order to increase the retention of information. So let's look at an example. Trying to just drill down and get really specific. If we look at an example, and the idea of just-in-time training really fits nicely into the fact that there are several different modalities to actually train someone. And what you want to do in a perfect scenario, a perfect world, is you want to train people as they will need to use that skill. So for example, we have a worksheet or a spreadsheet for leasing goals. And community managers need to understand how to use that spreadsheet and then how to also coach to that spreadsheet with their leasing consultants. So if I have a new community manager, I'm not going to train them on the leasing skill spreadsheet in their first week on the job because it won't do them any good. They need to learn all the other stuff, the basics. They need to get into their job and understand what they're doing and know where their office is and who their people are and all that stuff, and understand how to use, MRI and Nexus and those things. And then after about a month, I'm going to assign them the basic video explaining the process in our LMS system. And then in another month or so, I'm going to invite them to a webinar discussion about it. But I'm going to stage it so that it's just in time to when they will use it, so that it's not, a moment in time that's just lost in the sauce because they're never going to use that muscle, flex that muscle. So an example, fair housing overview, just in time multi-channel training. So I call it define it. So at first I'm going to give them, let's just say they're a new hire, it makes it kind of easier for this example. It's foundational, short fair housing info for new hires and incumbent refreshers. So for a new hire, I'll give them the overview for all positions. Depending on what position they're in, there are 3 more fair housing courses that we have on demand. None of them are particularly long, but they are explicit and they're, important information. So they will get that first, and they'll get that in their first week on the job. The next step is their fair housing workshop. So that I call debate it. That is taking the information that's nuanced, but in those on-demand classes where there's quizzes and things like that, but it's still one way, and bringing them in. We have new hire training and we do it monthly. So they would come in at the next month and they will debate it. And that's a deep dive into fair housing topics with role play, candid discussion. Mostly for us, it's live. During the pandemic, we did do it during in a webinar. Then we move on to on-the-job training. So fair housing on-the-job training is embedded into several of the topics. This is just sort of a snapshot of some of them, but several of the topics that are on-the-job training oriented. And this is an example of part of our Pride Passport. The back of the Pride Passport has specific questions that support each of the topics for exposure. They're not numbered, it's not a quiz, it's just used within 45 days so that at 45 days, a supervisor and a direct report can sit down and review, where do I think that we've given you enough exposure for now at least, and where do we need to spend some more time? So that's a good kind of, you're at 45 days, you're halfway through what we would call a probationary period. Let's pause, let's see what you've done, and let's talk about what we need to do still. And so that's develop it. That's trying it, explore, in this case, fair housing conversations in a safe environment with a mentor, could be a supervisor, could be a peer expert. Then the last piece is consistent coaching, and that's discuss it. We're all adults, we're not, children. We can sit and we can talk about what we're learning and what we're trying and what we're doing. We generally, as adults, are self-aware enough to know what we think we're doing well or what we think we have more questions about. And as influencers or leaders, we have to observe and we have to coach. So it's all about incremental growth and cultivation of expertise through coaching. And that idea of being candid and giving someone the respect that they're due by telling them how they're doing, because we all deserve to know how we're doing. And we don't deserve to know it once a year when there's a compensatory review or anything like that. We need to know incrementally, how am I doing? So that's an example of how that might work. And that will take you, the consistent coaching should be all the time, but that for us, our on-the-job training tool is due back at 45 days. It actually gets uploaded into their Paylocity employee account. And so the coaching for that particular thing involves a plan of what we need to do next, and that will take them through their 90 days. So this is an example of how a new hire might learn fair housing laws within their probationary period of 90 days. So let's for a second talk about the coaching flow. And I think, it's really important that we just kind of say out loud when we're coaching people, even incrementally on just small sets of skills. It's important that we're setting clear expectations, which sounds so silly, but oftentimes if you really talk to people who have had some struggles with learning specific things, they go, oh, I didn't realize that that was part of what I was supposed to do. So we have to be detailed, we have to be specific, and we have to set the expectation of what it is we want the person to learn and do. Then we need to observe. So we don't want to over focus or overutilize third-party feedback. It never feels good when you're like, oh, someone told me that you were doing this. Sometimes we have to utilize third-party observation, but whenever possible, we want to be able to observe someone trying out that skill that we've set the expectation for ourselves. And you can tell someone, I'm gonna, observe you doing it, and I'll let you know how you're doing, so that it doesn't feel weird when you're observing, or you can jump in and be in it with them. But that idea of setting the expectations specifically, observing, giving feedback, and doing it right away, so it's timely, it's in the moment, using reinforcement and redirection. And just as a side note, when we're using reinforcing behaviors and redirection, in order to increase receptivity, for someone to truly feel like you care about them and you're giving them feedback that they can utilize and they trust you, you want to try to use the idea of 75% of the time, catch someone doing something right. As Ken Blanchard in 1 Minute Manager would say, like, find someone doing something right as often as you can. Be specific and tell them, reinforce that behavior. That way, 25% of the time, when you're catching them doing something not quite right and you have to redirect that behavior, they're receptive to hearing that from you because they feel that you care about them and that you're not just dinging them for what they're not doing well, but you're also recognizing them for what they are learning and doing well. So that's just kind of a good tip to have out there. But again, it's that idea of giving the feedback in the moment as often as you can and managing that performance. And so that's the bigger picture. So managing performance is, yay, we're getting there, we're learning, we're on to the next thing. Or maybe there's a bigger issue and maybe that involves a bigger conversation. So that whole idea of managing performance is a little bigger than in the moment of giving feedback. And then you start over again with setting expectations, whatever it is that you're coaching that person on what they're learning. So that idea, again, of consistent coaching, it's collaborative and it happens all the time. So that's the idea of the flow of how we hopefully, in a perfect world, can coach. So let's talk then, we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So let's talk about the idea, again, the multi-channel training positive effects. So using all of these different modalities, all these different channels, using bite-sized pieces in our on-demand moments, giving information that is foundational and informational, but building upon it with instructor-led classes, and then also with on-the-job training, and then reinforcing all of that with coaching. When you put all those things together, there's an increase in a lot of stuff. So I'm going to give you some statistics, but before I give you the statistics, I'll just read you the things that are on here. We have an increase in productivity, in engagement, in income for the employee, in profit for the company, in expertise, so that's for the person and for the company, and retention of good people. Those things all are increased by us being able to utilize the idea of the learning pyramid to increase this retention and engagement. So remember that engagement 1 and 2, so the 3 top employee motivators of opportunity to learn new things and advancement opportunities. We sort of talked a little bit about those, but let's also talk about the third, which kind of has to do with compensation. So just to give you a little bit of research or statistics. So research shows that a full 40% of employees who don't receive the necessary job training to become effective will leave their positions within the first year. So if you look at, and we always do, when are we losing people? If you're losing them in that first year, about 40% of people who feel they don't receive what's necessary to do their job well or effectively, they'll leave within that first year. It's a big chunk of turnover. Also, according to the Association for Talent Development, ATD, companies that offer comprehensive training programs have 218% higher income per employee than companies without formalized training. I'm going to repeat that, 218% higher income per employee. Just for having an actual comprehensive and structured training program. That's amazing, but it doesn't stop there. These same companies also enjoy a 24% higher profit margin than those who spend less on training. So right there, we're speaking to the idea, if we look at what I just said out loud, right? That people leave when they don't receive the training that they feel they need to be successful, 40% of people pretty much. Then the fact that anyone who companies that offer a structured training program, a comprehensive training program, their employees have 218% higher income. So that speaks right there to our third top motivator that Melissa mentioned in the very beginning of this time together. Then I'll give you one more thing. In another recent national survey of over 400 companies, or employees, I'm sorry, spanning 3 generations, so we're talking baby boomers, Generation X, and millennials, 70% of the respondents indicated that job-related training and development opportunities influence their decision to stay at their job. So we're talking about retention through engagement and learning and development as more than a moment in time, but an entire suite of tools that is ongoing all the time to constantly help people feel supported and that people care about the cultivation of their skills and development, their expertise, their promotability, and their retention. So that's sort of the moral of the story, tying up our 3 top motivators that we mentioned earlier. And that's my story.
I love it. I love it. And I think some of the things that really caught my attention, and I think you're really right when you say this, and I think we're really focused on sort of the traditional things. So learning through, webinars and computers and things like that, and then instructor led. But I think we do fall short on that on the job training, or at least formalizing or putting sort of structure around that in some way so that it's more effective. And then that coaching piece, when we're in the moment in our jobs, we sort of forget that they don't know what to do every time. We're there to help them through that. And I think that's interesting. And I love 75% of the time, catch them doing something right. That's also something that as leaders, I think we need to focus on, because no one wants to just hear the negative, right? So you've got to balance that out and overdo it on the positive side, just to make sure they trust you enough to believe what you're saying to them. That's not, in any kind of, coming from a negative place. It's something that you're there to help them. You want them to succeed. So I loved sort of that idea around how we can really support them in that way and motivate them.
Yeah, I would add in one thing too. I think just with the on-the-job training stuff, because I do think it's a place where we can all, do better for our employees. That I would argue that you don't have to have a one-on-one mentor relationship for a new hire. I would say that, I choose to call them peer experts because there are certain people who are really good at systems and certain people who are really good at resident relations, whatever it is. So I would argue that it's almost more important to have someone shadow or flex some on-the-job training muscles with 2 people or 3 people. I always recommend 2 separate days in 2 separate communities with 2 separate people, and then in your own community with your peers and your supervisor. Because I think one-to-one mentor relationships are really great and important, but I think we can have more than multiple one-on-one relationships during an on-the-job training experience. So.
Absolutely. And it also helps them to get to know more people in the organization, so they feel a bit more connected too. In that way, they don't feel like they only know, their community and one other person. So I think that's
absolutely
a couple different areas, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, well, I absolutely love that, and I can't wait to hear even more. So, Michelle, we are going to learn a little bit more about Atlantic and Pacific Company and how they sort of tackle this learning and development.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to share with all of you some of our learning modalities that we're applying and talking about mentors and coaches. We actually have a program I'm going to talk a little bit about, which is our A Perfect Mentor program. And we really thought long and hard about how we would implement something like this. Gen Z is a social generation, and having a mentoring program allows us to bring that social learning to them. It also builds a relationship early on and welcomes them to the company. And I mean, we all know with 71 properties here and the number that Jen has at her community or company, we can't be everywhere. And so by having these one-on-ones, you have someone who's helping build team trust and provide that personalized feedback. But I agree, you know, you don't have to just have one person. You can have multiple people mentoring that new hire depending on the position. So looking at our mentoring program and moving through the thought behind how we would design it, moving to the next slide, we designed an onboarding experience and mentoring experience not just for our site level employees, but we also started to think about those other employees who want to move maybe in a different direction and not through those traditional ranks of, you know, leasing agent to property manager or maintenance through maintenance supervisor. So we've really been focused on designing an environment where those superstar team members can also find their niche and build skills to take on different projects. And they're able to do that by kind of a more loosely organized mentoring where they're given projects from an operations team member, or maybe there's some, you know, data that needs to be pulled apart. And so really finding those ways, those different ways that you can present learning opportunities has been more engaging for our employees and allowed us to really identify those superstars. We now have people from various on-site positions working closely with our learning and development team and our operations team outside of those traditional roles that they had previously kind of been pinned for, you know, oh, they're a great leasing agent, let's make them an assistant manager, here's the career path. And it's like, yeah, but if somebody's a great leasing agent, are they really going to enjoy that next set of skills that they're going to have to learn to be an assistant manager? And the answer is not always yes. So moving through our career path planning, I think we might have missed one slide. If you could just back up one. Oh, it didn't pull through. Well, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the career path planning. The maintenance team has really been our focus recently, and so we're testing out a map program similar to kind of the journey card or the bingo card, but it's a map, and we host it with a bit of on-job training, as Jen mentioned earlier, and also some self-guided training, additional resources from, you know, our vendor partnerships where they're able to partner with, you know, the repair companies of the different utilities and appliances that we use. So we've outlined this career path, and we administer on-the-job training, tests, video assignments, and there's different check-in points throughout their journey where their supervisors checking in and providing feedback to the L&D team and making sure that there's progress being made. And really the program is allowing us to grow our own and also change someone's life. We have a groundskeeper who has gone through this, entered multifamily with no experience whatsoever, and is now a fully confident maintenance technician working at a property in a career that he never, you know, even considered prior to us, you know, handpicking him and putting him through this career path. So we're excited to continue to expand that, but we're really focused on identifying those personalities and behaviors and good culture fits, and then really growing our own by supporting their learning in a different way. So I'm happy to talk about and brainstorm that offline after the session. We don't have a lot of time, so I do want to talk about some other things. Moving to our next topic, we really encourage, oh, that's so strange. That's the slide. Can you move forward just one more?
Yes, I just found that, so sorry.
No problem. So the next slide is actually encouraging our managers to learn about their employees and communicating with them. So having those intentional conversations and one-on-ones when possible. And so training everyone to continue to have those one-on-ones with the Gen Z and Gen Ys, although they tend to have an aversion to the telephone and prefer text, they actually don't mind having meaningful conversations, and it's all part of their training. And they make up a large group of our our on-site employees these days. So depending on who is actually in the audience listening to this webinar, if you're responsible for the L&D of your company, train your managers to have those one-on-one conversations. Give them the tools, a loose outline of how to have them, and really encourage them to connect, because these are intentional meetings. And so they're to talk about things other than the work that they're doing every day. It's more of an extension of training, and it helps determine what type of development need it exists for your team. So I found that some employees might be hesitant to speak freely right off the bat. So I always start with a conversation around non-work related things. You know, I might ask how you're doing, how was your weekend? And I share a little bit about my time, what I'm doing, just to level the playing field. And we're able to connect, but then I'm able to move through questions that will help me understand the levels of their own personal engagement in their career. So some common questions I'll throw out are, you know, what are some challenges you're facing? What are some resources I can give you? Are there any new things that you're interested in working on? And so really asking those open-ended questions and getting them thinking. And, you know, sometimes they may look at you and say, you know what, I'm not really sure. And that's okay. I say, we're going to meet again in a month. Let's talk about it then. But, you know, just be ready. Let's talk about it, because them knowing that you are engaged in their growth is going to excite them and have them engage more in their own self-driven development. And then I always ask, is there anything you'd like to talk about me with that I haven't addressed yet? I give them the opportunity to let me know, you know, yeah, I have an interest in taking this certification, or I would like to learn more about the assistant manager role, but I'm not sure I really want to be one. So how can we set that learner up with an opportunity to get that on-the-job training? So moving into the next topic that I wanted to talk about, and I think it's a common message between Jen and I, is just being flexible, that not everyone learns the same way or at the same pace. So using on-the-job training to help your employees develop the skills that they're interested in. I was reading an article, and one of the people they quoted was Margaret Rogers. She's a VP of Paravita Solutions, and they were talking about classroom style training. And you know, she made a comment that it builds a solid foundation, but that it quickly loses its effectiveness if it's not applied regularly. And that is always a challenge. And so instead, we're trying to create learning moments out of those daily responsibilities and encounters. So she also said, you know, that these moments can be significant or small, but engaging them in that way is a way to keep them from stepping outside, or to step outside of their comfort zone, practice and build confidence. So it allows them to ask questions, it encourages them to ask questions, and it makes them feel confident. So for an example, you know, imagine if you had an employee who's great at having difficult conversations with residents, but really struggles with nerves when having to follow up with that resident when the resolution isn't exactly what they wanted. So that can be used to create those learning moments. You could take the time to have the conversation of how to deliver the message with the team member. So it allows them to practice, improve their confidence in a safe environment. And then when they're moving through and having to actually execute, they're more prepared and at ease. Those are those learning moments and on-the-job learning experiences that allow employees to discover and utilize the tools they need to grow in their jobs and on their own terms, while having access and guidance from their more experienced colleagues. Really, for managers, you know, it allows them to implement customized training for their employees. So not every employee is the same, right? So being able to speak to them and to provide them with that support is super important. So moving in, many of you may be familiar with Bloom's taxonomy. I often refer to this learning theory when we're designing learning opportunities. It really helps identify the stages associates must go through to learn new things. And it also helps create effective training programs. And really the most efficient way for you to apply this at your company would be to identify the 4 employee skill levels. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in my next topic. But also it helps you meet your learners where they're at. You know, are they expert or are they, you know, brand new? And then define the objectives based on the employee skill levels and knowledge gaps. And then third, you want to think about during this process is the best method for content delivery. You're really going to be able to unearth that once you've identified and defined those objectives. So talking about my next topic, which is learner personas. Some of you may know me, some of you don't. I spent several years as a director of marketing, and I used this idea of customer personas to help me identify my target market. So it was basically, you know, a cardboard cutout that represents a segment of our potential prospect base. And I would include some broadly defined demographic information. I would have goals, pain points, and preferences. And I found by segmenting our audience this way, we could create more relevant ads, you know, reduce spend, and that those ads not only reached our target audience, but resonated with them. And so I would encourage you to do this for your own learners, and it doesn't need to be elaborate. You could use sticky notes, whiteboards, walls, PowerPoints, Word. I mean, there are so many ways that you could really create these learner personas. In fact, on my next slide, the visual I want to show you guys is Frontline Frank. I took these off the internet. They're not mine, but this is a very basic way of outlining a learner persona. And so the same thing applies to our learning and development initiatives as they did in the marketing side. And by creating these, we begin to see the segmentation process. And we do include demographic information, education, geography, like where they're at in the country. We also want to know, you know, some psychometric information, and that's the data that speaks to learners' motivations and their goals and their needs. Why is the learner completing the content? It helps us identify that and build more motivating factors that are going to help, you know, with those day-to-day tasks that they need to learn. You know, how do they prefer to learn? Is Frontline Frank a computer guy, or is he, you know, more interested in a piece of paper and a workbook? So we find that by building these personas, we're also able to survey our learners in building them. And so we'll ask a group of our learners, you know, what's your level of comfort when it comes to using technology? What are your preferences when it comes to learning? You know, do you want to be face-to-face? Do you want something digital? And what are their goals and their behaviors like? So exploring the persona even more in depth, and after surveying, we would then outline it in a persona template. And I've included an example on this next slide. And I would, you know, I wouldn't interview everyone, but at a minimum, you know, interview a person who can represent a range in your organization. So maybe you're talking to an expert, maybe you're talking to a mid-range person, and then those people who are maybe brand new or falling behind. We want answers to the questions, but we also want to find our middle. We can't answer for every single person, but as long as we're operating kind of in that middle area, we're going to be able to tap into those things that excite and engage your learners. And where are your system strugglers? And do I have to create additional tools to follow up with those system strugglers to get them up to speed? You know, those asking yourself questions and surveying a broad number of people in your organization will help you be able to answer those and then properly plan your training for execution. And then as a guide when creating these learning personas, I also like to ask myself the questions of how will they feel about this learning? What are the skills and competencies that they'll improve on? And will it make sense for them as a learner? They will always be a work in progress, your learner personas, but individuals and technology are not set in stone. So things change and people grow over time. So updating them frequently and really reconsidering who you're designing for is of the utmost importance. And so we've moved to the 4 types of learners. This is really what we refer to as VARK in the learning and development world. And so we have visual, auditory, reading, kinesthetic, and when I think of visual, you know, for this generation that's making up a large number of our workers, short videos and micro learning, you know, how are these, the millennials learning, they're on YouTube. So why don't we incorporate that into our learning and delivery concept? And then auditory, you know, are you able to do a podcast? That's another great option. You have, you know, the reading and writing, note taking. So are you providing guides and designing guides for people to follow along? It can be something as simple as leaving a word out and making them fill in the blank. And while that may seem old school, there are still people whose preferred learning style is reading and writing. And then the kinesthetic, you know, I like to think about it from a kinesthetic tactile, where a learning style requires you to manipulate or touch material. Think about your maintenance teams. Those are the ones that this probably applies to the most. And then we always consider the role of technology and the level of expertise that our team members have when interacting with it. So our Gen Z and millennial associates might not have any trouble navigating a sophisticated e-learning platform, whereas our older employees, you know, they may need a little bit more guidance. Or, I mean, I could be wrong. My dad at the age of 75 was a pro at technology, and he had more followers on his Facebook business page than I did 10 years ago. But knowing your audience and their skill level will help you determine what type of learning modality is going to best meet their needs. And then the clear and constructive feedback, it's essential during employee training. So moving through, I have 2 more slides and we're close on time, so I'm going to try to move quickly. But I want to get to my last slide because I think it's one of the most futuristic things that we can talk about when it comes to learning and development. But I just want to encourage you to continue to have a strategy to ensure that your feedback is communicated often and effectively. And like Jen said, positive and negative, because she's right. If you're giving feedback and it's always negative, you're not going to get that acceptance when you're coming to them without any positivity. So moving to my last and final point that I want to share with you guys that we're focused on is that AI doesn't need to be scary. You know, we hear this AI and the robots are coming to replace us. They are not. I've spoken to them. They just want to help. And, you know, it's a bit challenging because most of us are not even actually consciously aware of the AI that we're already using and experiencing. Online shopping is a big part of that. And then recommendation functions to voice to text. You know, you have your personal assistants, Alexa and Siri. You know, our personal and work lives are already so impacted by these new technologies that we really need to find ways to incorporate it into our learning and development. And so ways that I'm focused on it is with AI, helping to create a more user-centric experience. And the primary role of that in applications is to gather and process user-specific data and use it to augment the user experience so that it's not, you know, everybody logs in and takes the same 5 courses their first day. We want to find a way to do it similar to an example would be like your Netflix account. So when you're logging in, you're getting recommendations for movies and a percentage that you might like the new show. So AI remembers and uses its memory to create an experience that places the user at its core. So it's really that adaptive learning that is personalized to each learner. It's a powerful way to engage today's workforce. And recently I read in on Inc.com that they pointed out that the challenge facing L&D folks is that it's be able to make sense of the data and to leverage those insights to drive the value of the training. So I am hopeful that we will continue as an industry to focus on ways to incorporate adaptive learning and AI, and that our LMS partners and our survey partners will continue to focus on building that into the programs, because as an industry, it's important for us to push forward this type of technology and ask for it. You know, historically, I think we've all been known to be behind on the tech space, and the pandemic has certainly helped push us in the right direction on the front line. So why not in learning and development? But really, the robots are not coming, and that's really the point I wanted to get across and share, is that the adaptive learning and the AI, I think, is the future of our training and how we're going to really customize it for those different learners.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I think the Netflix example is perfect because I think all of us can relate to that and how it really does kind of get to know us.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's interesting too. My kids, they I wouldn't say hate, that's kind of a strong word, but they dislike school, right? Because it's a very traditional setting, but they learn so many things on those YouTube shorts and like
Yeah.
TikTok and stuff like that. And it's like, it's so interesting because it's memorable, it's fun, but they're learning and they don't even realize. They just come and tell me, oh, Mom, you know this? And I'm like, no.
Oh, you're so right. My son's now a leather maker. He's sewing pouches and bags, and he's never outside of YouTube seen one in his life. So it's impressive.
Right. And I think it can apply to organizations and companies. It's not just a fun, learning a different hobby kind of thing anymore. I think we can really use that as we move forward.
Yeah, it's a new spin on an old style. Video's been around, but let's make them like YouTube, and let's make them short and specific.
Absolutely. And I'm so sad. I know we're sort of out of time, but our panelists have been fantastic. And as I mentioned, things are changing, and they've given some really great examples. I loved, the learner personas. A lot of us in the training space are also, especially at smaller companies, tasked with the marketing department too. So we're all super familiar with creating those personas and things like that. So I think, just making that connection and applying that to the training world as well. Create those personas so that we are delivering at least as much of an adaptive learning experience as we can at the moment until that technology is there. But thank you again to our panelists. You've been fantastic. I really appreciate it. And I know it's worth it to go over today. So I appreciate your patience with us. But Michelle, Jen, wonderful content. Thank you for sharing with our audience. For those of you this says 1 hour after the webinar, but that is wrong. So right after we close today, there is a post on social media if you want to comment your favorite learning tip again that you learned today, or maybe you have something that you're doing that's really cool at your organization. We'd love to hear about it. So like that post on Facebook or Instagram at Satisfax or Satisfax Education, and we will pick that winner tomorrow. So we will let you know who is the winner from sharing that on social. And then we would love to see you. So next month, don't forget, it did change up a little bit. So October 27th is our next Power Panels webinar, and we're going to talk all about the slow season. We don't want us to have the blues this year. So don't get the slow season blues is what we're going to talk about in October, and we can't wait to see you there. You will get the follow-up email so that you can register for that session as well. But again, thank you for being here. We appreciate you, and good luck in all of your employee development endeavors this year and moving forward into the future. So thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.